Well, thank you very much, Charles. That was a very from-the-heart presentation of somebody who's been inspired by what he's learned and done and succeeded with in Nigeria. From my own experience, I've had the good fortune to live a few years a little further down the coast in Abidjan. That was about 30 years ago. A lot of things have changed. But since then, I've gone to other emerging markets like Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, and India. And some of the points that were made by Charles apply across the board for Canadian investors. And that is we have to be a little bolder, not reckless, bolder, courageous, and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented in countries, specifically Nigeria. Now, the next speaker who's going to be sharing his experience with us comes from a company that's probably a little better known than Charles's company, CPCS. It's Peter Kieran, who will talk about his experience and his success building his business, or that part of his business that deals in Africa.
Thank you very much. I was saying to Charles after he came off the podium and delivered such a wonderful talk that he really should consider a career in politics. I've never seen someone quite as smooth. I'll tell you just a little bit, and I think I'll be fairly brief, but I want to tell you just a little bit about our history in Nigeria and how our business evolved there. On the way down from Ottawa on Wednesday night, my wife and I bumped in on the airplane to Senator Donald Oliver. Those of you who know Senator Oliver, I'm not sure if he's the very first, but I believe he's the first black senator. He comes from Nova Scotia in the Senate, and he's presently acting as the Speaker of the Senate. And he reminded me that in 1999, he and I and several other people went to Nigeria just after the first democratic elections in Nigeria in many, many years, together with a group of people, and it was put together. Unfortunately, he hasn't been here, but I'm sure many of you, especially from Toronto, will know Jude Igwemezi, who was with us and organized that trip. So Jude is a railway man, and we were talking to the people in transportation and railways about opportunities. A little bit later, we won our first contract, and that was to look at the commercialization opportunities for Nigeria Railways. Nigeria Railways, and I haven't seen the MD today. I saw him last night, who's here, and he actually has begun a terrific job at turning around the railways. But the railway at that time and still today, it really is in a very sad state in terms of its former business and the scale of operations. But it was even worse back in the 2000s. So that was our first work in Nigeria, and then after that, our second project, and Dr. Bamanga Tukur, who I think has stepped out but was here involved in the session just previously, asked us to assist him in starting a new business called Eco Marine, basically a shipping company that was operating in West Africa, and we were helping him to look at markets and operations and getting that business going, which is still successfully operating today. But we began to become more interested in Nigeria and saw a number of opportunities. Not long after, the Bureau of Public Enterprises put out a tender for a transaction advisor to assist in the restructuring and privatization of the Nigeria Ports Authority. And we have done port privatizations around the world. I think we've had helped governments to privatize their ports in about 9 countries. So we bid for that. It was a World Bank financed contract, and we were fortunate enough to win. And then we started on the very challenging job of privatizing the port. At that time, the entire port system was run by the Nigeria Ports Authority. They handled all the cargo and operated all the ports as a single entity. So our first step was to break the port up into a number of different terminals so that we could get private investment into those terminals and so that there would be competition among the terminals. We also tried and had agreement at one point, but the government went back on it. We also tried to break Nigeria Ports Authority, which would continue as the landlord, up into smaller organizations, although that didn't go through. After we'd done our initial analysis, I had the opportunity to meet President Obasanjo and make a presentation of the course that we were recommending. And I remember very well, we were at State House and he had a number of people there, several of his ministers, the Minister of Transport. He had a number of private investors. Aliko Dangote was there as well. And I went through a slide presentation, and I think the President stopped me on every single slide. He wanted to ask a question, or sometimes he would lean over and talk to one of his ministers and say, "Did you see that? Do you see what Mr. Kieran is saying? Make some notes and see if you can do something about that." He also was extremely open, and I was very impressed with his openness to new ideas and the fact that he relied on facts to make his decision. One of the big contentious issues was that a number of parts of the port had effectively were being used by private companies, and in fact Dangote was one of those people. He operated a very large flour terminal in the port of Lagos, and effectively he controlled that part of the port. So in our plan, we basically told the President that we would establish a reserve price and then have direct negotiations with Dangote and with a number of other people who had similar terminals. The President expressed great concern about this. And he said, no, he said, you won't be able to do it. They won't negotiate with you. They'll give you a hard time. And we had two arguments. We basically came back to him and said, look, our job here is to attract foreign investment into Nigeria and into the port sector. We think it would be a mistake to immediately start by penalizing the people who have in fact already put private equity and investment into the port sector. So he thought quite a while and he said, okay, well, he said, I still think in 12 months you'll be back here asking me to pass legislation to cancel those contracts we have, but please go ahead. And I must say it was very successful. Those people were quite surprised when we rejected their first proposals and told them that they weren't adequate in terms of the technical content or the price. But we were able to negotiate contracts with these people that did meet the minimum requirements that we'd set, and in fact well exceeded those minimum requirements. And the investors, we had correctly anticipated that the investors would feel much more secure with a solid, long-term, proper concession agreement, whereas up until now they had been basically working under the authority of a letter with a few words scrawled on it, sort of signed by the President saying, yes, go ahead, or something of that sort. The other terminals were put out to competitive bidding, and the bids were very successful, quite a bit larger than we'd expected. The container terminal was concessioned on a 20-year basis to AP Moeller, and they paid a total of $1 billion, slightly under $990 million that they bid for the right to operate that terminal. So I think that opened a lot of people's eyes when they realized how valuable these concessions were and how much large international companies were willing to pay for those terminals. This whole process opened our eyes, I think, a great deal to Nigeria. We realized there were opportunities in ports, there were opportunities in railways, power, which was an emerging area of interest of ours, also was coming up for reform in Nigeria. So up until then, we were a very specialized company, and we tended to operate, go into a country and do a large project, and then look for another country where they were doing similar work. We had a very focused, narrow narrow business. But we decided that there were so many opportunities in Nigeria that we should open an office there, and we did, and we've been very successful. To the point that other people in the company started to raise the issue. They started to say, well, we're doing, Nigeria is one country, and we seem to have a lot of business there. Isn't that too risky? We shouldn't have more than a certain percentage of our business in Nigeria. So I basically challenged them. I said, okay, I agree. So the challenge is for each of you to find more work in those countries and in your geographic areas than we're finding in Nigeria. But I told the people in Nigeria, in the meantime, put your foot to the pedal and let's get as much work as possible in Nigeria. So we've continued on. We're very proud to be involved with the Lagos State government. There was a presentation earlier today on the Blue Line, the first commuter railway to be developed in Nigeria. And it's taking longer than we would like, although construction is going very well. The government is still negotiating with the concessionaire, but nevertheless, it was recognized. KPMG did a survey and analysis, and basically a list of the top 100 projects in the history of PPP, and that Blue Line was included as one of the projects for its innovative structure and just for the difficulty of overcoming some of the challenges. The other project you've heard a little bit about, but is the power industry, and we've been really very proud to be associated with the reform of the power industry in Nigeria. And those of you who have heard, basically we've helped the government to break the PHCN, NEPA, and then into the power holding company, and 17 companies, and 15 of those are in the final stages. The down payments have been made, and we expect them to close in the next few months. The other two, which didn't go through in their first round of bidding, we also have the preferred bidders selected, and I think those will move even quicker, so we also expect those to close within the next 6 months. We have offices in Abuja, in Lagos, and in Calabar. We've done a great deal of work in Cross River, and we see Nigeria as a continuing strong market for us and a place where we're delighted to invest and to work. So thank you very much for your attention.